The Old Kingdom, the first of the three great periods of Egyptian history, starts with Sneferu, who ruled between 2575 and 2551 BCE, and he was the first king of the fourth dynasty. The Old Kingdom ends with the breakup of the eighth dynasty in 2154. He is an important link from the step pyramid of Djoser to the Great Pyramids of Giza, which I'm showing you right now. Sneferu wanted to challenge the scale of Djoser's tomb by commissioning a pyramid of the same scale, but with smooth sides. So he wanted to have a smooth sloping side rather than the stepped side of the step pyramids. He attempted this 2 times and failed. And on the third time, the pyramid stood, but it wasn't of as grand as the pyramids we see at Giza. At Giza, we see a massive mortuary complex, a necropolis. It's dominated by the 3 primary pyramids and is surrounded by a necropolis of mastabas that would have been for elites. And the smallest pyramid has 3 stepped pyramids on the side of it. The 3 primary pyramids on the Giza Plateau were built over the span of 3 generations by rulers of the same family. Khufu, that's this pyramid here, Khafre here, and Menkaure over here. Each pyramid was part of a royal mortuary complex of its own that included a temple at its base and a long stone causeway, which is sort of a roadway or a path that led from the Nile to the pyramid. And it led also to a valley temple on the edge of the floodplain. So these 3 pyramids at Giza were dedicated to the 3 pharaohs that commissioned them. Khufu was the grandfather, so this is the oldest and the largest. Even though in this photograph it looks somewhat smaller than the one in the center, we have to remember that the level would have been lower at the time of its building. Khafre is the son, and this is the pyramid in the center. It would have been had a limestone cap that may have been gilded, so that would have been gleaming in the sun. And then Menkaure, the grandson, and that's the smallest pyramid. The pyramids, of course, are perfect geometric forms, and they have symbolic value. They relate to the relationship with the father, that is the sun god Ra. The sun rays pierce diagonally through the clouds and become a pyramid. And remember that when we looked at ziggurats, they symbolized the gods coming down to stay with the people. The Egyptian pyramids represent the pharaoh rising up to his father and becoming a god himself. They also represent Benben, the original mound of earth that the sun god revealed himself to man, referencing the original Egyptian creation myth. You can see from this sectional diagram of the pyramid of Khufu that the architecture is very solid. There is no space inside. It's not meant for anyone to go into, but it's a marker when it closes when the body is entombed, much like the mastaba or the step pyramid before it. Unlike a mastaba or the step pyramid, the burial chamber for the king is embedded in the architecture. It's embedded in the middle of the pyramid, rather than accessed through a shaft underground. From this model, I think you can get a sense of the surrounding context of the pyramids. When you approach from the Nile, you would be met with a valley temple. And then the causeway brings you to the funerary chapel, and then eventually the pyramid. When a pharaoh died, the body would be carried by boat across the Nile from the royal palace and then carried to the Valley Temple here. There would be ceremonial rites performed by priests, and then the body would be carried up the causeway to the funerary temple. And this is where the body again would be prepared and offered rituals and ceremonies by priests. It would then be carried to the burial chamber. From this model, you'll also notice a few other things. The Great Sphinx was placed along the causeway towards Khafre's pyramid. There were also 80 other smaller pyramids and small tombs, and you see many of those mastabas that I mentioned before surrounding the temple, rather the pyramid of Khafre. If we look over at Menkare's tomb, the smallest one, we see those smaller step pyramids beside them. There are many, many questions about the construction of these massive monuments, and there's no shortage of theories about the actual construction methods used. You only have to go to YouTube and search to find tons of conspiracy theories about aliens or time travelers building the pyramids. There's no doubt that there was a tremendous workforce needed to build these structures. The organization of these workforces are still up for debate. The discovery of a town for workers, the archaeological remains of this town, was discovered to the south of the plateau, and it's given us some answers. It's likely that there was a permanent group of skilled craftsmen and builders. And these were people that we know from the archaeological remains were well fed and well cared for. They probably would have been supplemented by seasonal crews of approximately 2,000 conscripted peasants. And this contradicts, I think, what was previously the assumption about the pyramids, is that it was mainly built by enslaved labor. The presence of well-fed and well-paid skilled laborers shows that it was really a combination of many different kinds of workers with different skill sets. These crews were divided into gangs of 200 men, with each group further divided into teams of 20. And they've done experiments to figure out how these groups could have moved such massive, massive rocks. Some of these were blocks that weighed over 2 tons. They found that they could move these huge blocks from the quarry to the pyramid in about 20 minutes, using a path that was lubricated with wet silt. An estimated 340 stones could be moved daily from the quarry to the construction site. And this is pretty amazing, particularly when you consider that many of the blocks were smaller than that. The quarried blocks of stone would have been cut on site, and we think that they used a system of ropes and levers to pull the stones up into place, and probably a system of scaffolding that either spiraled around the pyramids or zigzagged up the sides. As I mentioned, the Great Sphinx is a sculpture that was located on the causeway going towards the pyramid of Khafre. It's carved from the bedrock of the Gizeh quarry, And it was probably meant to be an image of Khafre himself, and would have originally been wearing a ceremonial beard and a nemes, the headdress with the cobra. The Sphinx is a lion with a human head. And this is a common image for a king. Human intelligence combined with the strength of the king of the beasts. The lion was a royal symbol as well as being connected with the sun as a symbol of the horizon. And this fusion of a powerful animal with the head of a pharaoh was an icon that survived and was often used throughout Egyptian history. You'll notice that the king's head is on a smaller scale than the body. This is probably because there was a defect in the stone, and the sculptors recognized this weakness and compensated by elongating the body. Here I'm showing you an image of the pyramid of Menkaure, which is the smallest and the last of the pyramids to be built. And one thing I want you to imagine is that each of the pyramids would have been covered in white limestone. So they would have had a veneer of limestone that would have made them kind of gleam in the sun, giving them an incredibly impressive presence in what is essentially a flat plain. Here is the Pyramid of Khufu, as I said, the oldest and largest of the pyramids, known as the Great Pyramid. And in photography, it's really hard to capture the scale of these monuments, especially when they don't have the context of the entire complex. But what I'd like you to consider are the problems and solutions that the architects had. First of all, they would need to survey the site and find level and solid ground for each pyramid. After that, they needed to find the material, millions upon millions of stone blocks. They found limestone in the Gizeh plateau, but it needed to be transported. So after quarrying the stone, it had to be moved, and these massive blocks were pulled on sleds that, as I said, were probably helped by the lubrication of the silt on the plain. Then they had to be chiseled to the right size on site, and then they had to be lifted with ropes and levers to lower the stones in place. Finally, the white limestone, and this would have been carefully selected limestone, had to be put together so that the joints were almost invisible, giving the effect again that the sun would be bouncing off the side and seem to glow, again suggesting that solar symbolism.